If you're shopping for a tax attorney, you've probably seen fees all over the map. One attorney charges $500 an hour, another wants $10,000 as a flat fee, and the third one might say, we only get paid if we save you money. So what's the difference and which one is actually the better deal? I'm Andrew Bosserman, former IRS agent and tax attorney at Boss Tax Law, and today I'm going to break down exactly what you're paying for with IRS defense fees. So here's what nobody tells you about tax attorneys' fees. The pricing model matters just as much as the actual number, because a $500 hourly rate can end up costing you a lot more than a $10,000 flat fee depending on your case. And some of these pricing models, they're actually designed to benefit the attorney more than you. So let's walk through the three main ways tax attorneys charge, what each one actually means for your wallet, and which model makes sense for different types of IRS problems. So pricing model number one, hourly billing. Let's start with hourly billing because this is what most people think of when they think of lawyer fees. The attorney charges you for every hour or fraction of an hour they work on your case. So common rates for tax attorneys range from $300 to, pushing $1,000 even more, depending on the size of the firm and the experience of the tax attorney. And here's how it works in practice. An attorney will generally ask for what's called a retainer or a deposit upfront, let's say $5,000. That goes into the lawyer's trust account. It's kind of similar to an escrow account because it's not the attorney's money yet. It's still your money. It's just placed in an account that the attorney controls. And as the attorney works, they bill against that account. You get monthly notices showing items like reviewed IRS notice, 0.3 hours. A telephone call with a revenue agent, 0.5 hours. Legal research on penalty abatement, 2 hours. And then you get billed at the hourly rate for the actual time spent by the attorney on your case. If your case resolves quickly, you might spend less than you would on a flat fee, and that's the advantage of hourly billing. But the disadvantages of hourly billing, there are several. So first of all, you often have no idea what your final cost is going to be. That $5,000 retainer might last 2 months or 2 weeks, depending on how complex your case gets. Second, there's actually a perverse incentive here. So the longer your case takes, the more the attorney makes. Now, I'm not saying attorneys intentionally drag cases out, but the incentive structure isn't aligned with getting you the fastest resolution. And third, you're oftentimes paying for inefficiency. So if a junior associate takes 3 hours to research something a senior attorney would handle in 30 minutes, you're generally going to pay for those 3 hours. When does hourly make sense? Honestly, it rarely makes sense for the client in tax controversy work, at least from my perspective and with the cases I work with. The only time I see it working is for a very limited scope representation. Maybe you just need someone to make a few calls or review a proposed settlement the IRS offered, but oftentimes for full representation in an audit, appeal, collections case, litigation, hourly billing just creates too much uncertainty for clients who already are dealing with a financially stressful situation, generally involving a large bill to the IRS. So that's hourly billing. Let's move on to pricing model number two, flat fees. And flat fees are exactly what it sounds like. The attorney quotes you one price for a defined scope of work, and that's what you pay regardless of how many hours or how long it takes. For example, I'll represent you in this IRS audit for $10,000, or I'll handle your penalty abatement case for $5,000. And generally, all the work necessary to handle that matter from start to finish is included in the flat fee. These are things like reviewing documents, communicating with the IRS, submitting documents or filings, negotiations with the IRS, attending meetings. All of that work is covered. But the advantage of flat fees are that you have price certainty. So you know exactly what you're paying for up front. You can budget for it. And here's the key. The attorney is now incentivized to resolve your case efficiently. The faster they can get you a good result, the better their effective hourly rate is. The disadvantages of flat fees. So if the scope changes, the fee might change. For example, if you hire someone for an audit and it turns into an appeal or having to go to the tax court, that's probably going to cost additional amounts. You need to review the scope of work and be crystal clear about what's included and what's not. Also, flat fees require the attorney to estimate the work involved. If they underestimate, they eat the cost. If they overestimate, you might overpay a little bit compared to hourly work, but most clients I work with would rather possibly overpay a little for certainty on how much it will cost rather than get surprised by a massive hourly bill. So flat fees are often my preferred model for a lot of tax controversy work. Audits, collections work, dealing with back taxes from the IRS, all of these work well as flat fees, and also sometimes appeals and penalty abatements as well, but I sometimes structure those differently, which I'll talk about next. And this is because the client needs to know what they're getting into financially. They're already dealing with proposed or actual IRS debt, and adding an unknown legal bill on top of that creates, anxiety sometimes. But you definitely want to make sure you evaluate flat fees. So don't necessarily just shop on price. A $4,000 flat fee from someone with minimal experience might be a terrible deal compared to a $10,000 flat fee from someone who's actually going to resolve your case favorably and quickly. Also, ask what's included. Does it cover appeals if the audit doesn't go well, tax court petition, or all those separate fees? And finally, ask about payment terms. Some attorneys require full payment up front. Others will do a portion up front and a portion later on, or split it out over a certain number of months or periods. The payment structure oftentimes can matter as much as the total fee. So let's move on to pricing model number 3, contingency or percentage. Now we get to contingency or percentage-based fees. This is where the attorney's fees is calculated generally as a percent of what they save you or the refund you receive. So you might see this advertised a lot, and this is the preferred pricing model oftentimes for personal injury attorneys. You only get paid if we save you money. Our fee is 25% of the tax reduction we negotiate. So here's how it typically works. Let's say the IRS proposes a $100,000 tax liability. The attorney negotiates it down to $40,000. Their fee is 25% of the 60% savings, so that would be a $15,000 fee. Sounds great, right? You don't pay unless you get a successful outcome. But here's one thing you need to know is that contingent fees in tax matters are actually heavily restricted by IRS regulations, and that's called Circular 230. Contingent fees are allowed in 3 main situations. Number 1, audit defense or challenges to filed returns. Number 2, penalty and interest cases. And number 3, litigation. So if you're facing an audit, appeal, taking your case to tax court, or challenging penalties or interest, contingent fees are generally permitted. But here's where they're not permitted, and that's in pure collection cases. So if the IRS liability is already established and you're just negotiating payment or the amount owed, like an offering compromise or a payment plan, contingencies are problematic and not allowed under Circular 230. So definitely look out for this, because there may be companies out there offering to sell your tax debt for pennies on the dollar, and you're going to pay a percent of what they save you. They're typically operating outside and not in conjunction with Circular 230. So that can oftentimes be a red flag for either they don't know the rules or they're choosing to ignore them. Also, some attorneys like myself oftentimes structure fees as a combination, a reduced flat fee plus a success component, such as, say, $5,000 upfront plus 15% of any tax reduction beyond what we can save you or what the IRS is claiming that you owe. So this can oftentimes work well in audit, litigation cases, penalty abatement cases, but again, needs to be structured properly. So regardless of the pricing model the attorney you chooses, here's what you should actually be getting when you hire an attorney. Number 1, you get attorney-client privilege. Your communications are protected, and you can't get that from an EA or a CPA alone. Number 2, strategic analysis. Your tax attorney should be working with you to not just, form responses to the IRS, but actually developing a strategy for the best possible outcome. Number 3, your attorney should have knowledge of IRS procedures and leverage points. As a former IRS agent, I know what employees respond to, what arguments work, what's a waste of time, and just generally how things tend to go at the IRS. 4, protection from your own mistakes. So the IRS, might use anything you say in an interview possibly against you if it doesn't help your case. So an attorney is a go-between between you and the IRS and prevents you from accidentally volunteering damaging information. 5, with a tax attorney, you get the ability to go to tax court if necessary. If you're working with someone who can't litigate, you're oftentimes negotiating with one hand tied behind your back, in essence, because if the dispute progresses, you're going to have to find new counsel or potentially just, give in to what the IRS is saying at that point. And finally, and this might be the most important one, time and stress saved. You're not taking calls from the IRS. You're not trying to figure out what forms to file. You're not lying awake at night wondering if you're handling it right. Now, what's the right cost for all those things above? That depends oftentimes on the complexity of your case, the amount at stake, and the experience level of the attorney. But here's my rule of thumb. Just look at the potential total fees versus what the attorney thinks they can likely save you. Compare it, and oftentimes the investment is likely going to be worth the attorney's fees. So before we wrap up, let's just go through a few red flags in fee structures. So number 1, fees that seem too good to be true. If everyone else is quoting $10,000 or $15,000 for work and someone quotes you $1,500, you're probably not going to be getting the best representation. Red flag number 2, a vague scope of work. So we'll handle your IRS problem isn't a scope of work. What's specifically included? What happens if the case escalates? You need to know all of that before you sign up with an attorney. Red flag number 3, pressure to pay the full fee immediately with no clear milestones or work plan. Oftentimes attorneys will require payment up front for flat fees, but know what you're getting and what the projected timeline and milestones are. Red flag number 4, and we talked about this, is that contingent fees for collection cases where the liability is already established. This violates Circular 230 and IRS rules and signals the practitioner either doesn't know the rules or just is choosing to ignore them. Red flag number 5, no written fee agreement. Every legitimate attorney will give you a written engagement letter that spells out the fee, the scope of work, and the payment terms. Red flag number 6, hidden costs. The representation fee might be a flat $5,000, but oftentimes there's initial consultation fee, document review fee, monthly fees. Nickel and diming adds up fast, and that's just not the way I work with clients. Red flag number 7, fees based on a percent of your IRS debt. So our fee is 10% of what you owe. Again, this gets to contingent fees for Circular 230 that are prohibited. Now, oftentimes I use a pricing model in tax debt collection cases where the fees go up depending on the size of your IRS problem, because to fix a bigger problem with the IRS, it generally requires more work and there's more at stake. But doing a percent of what the debt you have as a contingent fee, that's not allowed. So here's the bottom line on attorney fee structures as we wrap up. For most tax controversy work, a flat fee oftentimes provides the best alignment of interest and most predictability for clients. You know what you're paying, the attorney is incentivized to resolve your case efficiently, and there's no anxiety. Hourly work can work sometimes, but creates lots of uncertainty and misaligned incentives between the attorney and the client. And contingent fees, they're permitted in certain cases like audit defense, penalty abatement, litigation, but prohibited in pure collection cases. And contingent fees oftentimes work great because you only pay if your attorney is successful, but just beware that they are prohibited in some instances. And most importantly, don't shop on price alone. The cheapest attorney is rarely the best value and is rarely going to get you the best outcome. So focus on experience, credentials, whether their fee structure makes sense for your specific situation and complies with IRS rules. So if you're dealing with IRS issues and want transparent, compliant pricing and experienced representation, I offer flat fee, hybrid, and contingency models for audits, appeals, penalty abatement, and tax court litigation. And also I do flat fees for tax debt resolution work. You'll know exactly what you're paying before we start working, and the fee structure is going to be appropriate for your type of case. So If that sounds like something you're interested in or you just want to discuss to see what the best steps are for your situation, please reach out, visit my website at bosstaxlaw.com. We can schedule a consultation and I'll review your situation and give you a clear quote for what it would cost to handle your case properly. So thanks very much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel for more tax controversy videos, and I'll see you in the next video.